The U.S. and China say they have reached a groundbreaking agreement,
putting carbon polluters on notice.
The step forward in tackling climate change.
The global warming towards tackling greenhouse gases.
An historic agreement, a breakthrough. Ambitious goals, new strict limits.
The ambitious new targets.
Major milestone.
Cranking down their emissions.
The race to reduce is on.
And they said, okay, Canada's gone. Now we can get down to brass tacks on this climate change.
These are fairly aggressive targets.
Well, this is an absolutely game-changing deal.
Jolly green giant of China there.
Leaving Canada as a follower.
Over to you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Okay, that's a pretty extraordinary montage of what unfolded over the past couple of weeks when this so-called historic deal between China and the U.S. was signed over climate change. And I recall at the time Lori Goldstein was here on the day that happened. Rebecca Thompson is also here with us. So great to see both of you. So you've been away, you know, in the United States for the past couple of weeks. You've missed a few things, but that you didn't miss because it's still on top of many people's minds. But the reason we have it for us to discuss today is our Environment Minister, Leona Aglukkaq. She's at a UN Climate Summit. Is this yet another useless one? And as I don't know, what's Wendy Mesley from CBC? You know, over to you, Mr. Prime Minister. What's all of this all about?
Look, with the greatest respect, this is part of an ongoing 20-year effort by the United Nations to get 190 countries on Earth to voluntarily reduce their emissions, and hopefully at the end of that to actually do it on a compulsory basis. The real story is coming out of Lima, which is where this conference. It's called the 20th UN COP conference. That means the Conference of the Parties, going back to the Kyoto Accord, right? This isn't the real important meeting. The real important meeting will be a year from now in Paris. They never go to Fort McMurray. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Like it's Lima, it's Copenhagen. Next year it'll be Paris, you know, Paris, nice country and all that, nice city. So anyway, but to long story, that will be where they'll try to do a new agreement for 2020 to replace the Kyoto Accord, which expired in 2012.
Okay, Rebecca, I want you to weigh in on this too.
You know, why do they have to have a meeting at all? If they're not going to come to an agreement this year, I mean, granted, it's, you know, 190 countries who have to come to an agreement, but we know that there's always gridlock. Every single year that there's an agreement that has tried to be reached, there is gridlock. But the big meeting isn't until next year. So why do you have to bring tens of thousands of people all the way to Lima? You know, one group, for example, studied the fact that the carbon footprint of this meeting alone in Lima is larger than, you know, name the island across in the world.
People do a mid-sized African country for a year. 29,000 carbon tons. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So you have all of these countries coming together, and yet we know that China hasn't agreed to monitoring, for example. We know that India hasn't agreed to a deadline as to how to achieve this. So there's gridlock, there's deadlock, and there's really no agreement that's going to be signed perhaps until next year.
It's odd, the alliances you form in this thing, because what the environmental observers and of the non-government organizations that are environmentalists say is, oh, well, China isn't going to allow its targets to scrutiny. It's not going to allow them to be scrutinized by other countries or, God forbid, the NGOs and the environmental groups. Well, okay, I agree with you at that point. What targets? There are no targets. This was that emissions in China would peak somewhere between 2025 and 2030, and actually people know what they're talking about when, well, you know what, Chinese emissions were actually going to peak then anyway.
Right.
You also got to remember, a year from now, Obama, the co-signer of the deal with China, will be the lamest of lame duck presidents at the very end of his presidency with the Republican Congress to deal with. And as Rebecca noted, India said, peak year, the year that we're going to peak, we're not talking about that. That'll be for later. So, look, this is part of a continuing, I would really call it a gong show. It has nothing to do with reality. Emissions continue to rise.
It's fantasy world.
And the only thing is, to me, I would say to our audience, the only thing to ask any politician who starts flapping his or her gums about this is, what is it going to cost me? And if you don't get a straight answer, you've got the real answer.
Well, but the political answer always is, and you'll hear it from the progressives and in the extreme radical left wing, is you can't put a price on this sort of thing. This is our future.
Well,
That's what they'll say.
You absolutely can. And Laura, you made a point earlier today that, some of the theory here is that it's the deindustrialization of the West, where you have China and India, basically running the agenda, putting language in, for example, that we intend to cut emissions. Well, it's not legally binding, and yet the impetus is for the Western world, Canada, the U.S., to actually cut emissions. Yeah. When you have environmental groups and even foundations and charities in the U.S., for example, who are spending millions of dollars to target the oil sands.
Yeah, look, this has never been about this is about money. The real issue here is the $100 billion a year climate fund that developed countries like the United States and Canada are expected to pony up to pay to developing countries, presumably to get rid of their emissions. The problem is a lot of those countries are third world dictatorships, they're totally corrupt, and the money will never get there.
And then stories come out that, this one UN climate fund went to then go build coal plants anyway. I mean, there's all this.
The way I put it, if Stephen Harper, and I don't think he will do this, but if he wants to win over all of these people, the Al Gores, the David Suzuki's, doesn't have to lower our emissions. All he's got to do is say, you know what, Canada's going to contribute $10 billion a year, 10% of this $100 billion fund going into eternity. I guarantee you he would be an instant hero. Now, he won't do that because, unlike, I think, Trudeau and Mulcair, he actually understands the issue. But that's what this is about. This isn't about the environment. It isn't about pollution. No. It isn't about saving the planet. It's about wealth redistribution. The UN has specifically said, one of their senior climate officials said, at the time, the Kyoto Accord is the way we distribute wealth in the world. That's what this is about. That's all it's about. It's not about any of the stuff that, frankly, journalists don't understand the issue are saying.
If it was about the environment, and the coal industry has been demonized, but if it was coal, for example, that they wanted to actually target as an example of reducing emissions, then wouldn't the ideas from engineers and people who are finding these technologies to reduce emissions coming out of coal plants in India, in China, in these developing countries that have increased their coal output substantially over the past 10 years, wouldn't it be a better target, a better story to come out of this summit saying, look, we have money going into these technologies alone, and that's a good step in the right direction.
And that's what will solve the problem eventually. The very technologies that these Luddites hate will deal with the problem.
Okay.